spent 90 days in a high security Michigan psychiatric hospital as ordered by a judge in Montcalm County, Michigan. And this was done after it was requested by a public defender assigned to me, named Lori Shearer, who under Michigan law, either the prosecution or the defense or the court itself may move that a litigant be declared incompetent to stand trial if they are demonstrating that they're incapable of understanding the proceedings around them and participating in their own defense. At no point was I confused about why I was in jail or in court. At no point did I demonstrate any confusion or failure to understand the justice process. But that was my attorney's opinion, and she didn't need to provide an argument. She just said, "Your Honor, I move that my client be declared incompetent." And then the judge issued an order for an assessment 2 months before I was assessed. And then the main reason that my attorney, Lori Shearer, had moved that I be declared incompetent to stand trial was because she was persuaded by a family member of mine, my mother, whose name is Diane Mason. My mother has had 3 members of my immediate family hospitalized and made claims that 3 family members, including me, present some sort of pathological psychosis, like a chronic condition. Most typically, this would be associated with schizophrenia. She has told people for 40 some years that my father is schizophrenic. My father is not schizophrenic. He doesn't hear voices. He doesn't see things, but she did have him hospitalized briefly before they were divorced, arguing that he was schizophrenic. Another family member who, like me, suffered severe child abuse and PTSD related to that abuse. My main symptom is dissociation, forgetting and numbing. His main symptom is extreme rage. And this family member was also hospitalized, and my mother told people that he had pre-psychotic or pre-schizophrenic symptoms, which isn't a thing. And he was too young to diagnose with schizophrenia. And also, this family member has never heard voices or seen things that aren't there. But my mother does like to tell people that he's schizophrenic. And I knew that my mother had been cultivating a story with her close friends and work colleagues about me being, just terribly mentally ill but unable to get help. That was starting at least 2 years ago. And the way I knew this was my mother, this is backtracking before I was arrested and sent to my 90 days in a psychiatric hospital, but to explain why my mother, not why, but how my mother influenced this chain of events. So anyway, in 2021, I discovered that I was the victim of serious acts of corruption in Chicago courts involving my ex-husband, who is a financial criminal. And I found that evidence, made reports to law enforcement, and then ultimately in January of 2022, I was issued whistleblower numbers for testimony that I gave about my ex-husband, Peter Mapp, and judges, court appointees, clerks, and elected officials in the Chicago area involved in a municipal corruption scandal, which is still ongoing, still being investigated, and a case just still being prosecuted. My mother has been witness to most of these events over the last 9 years. A few months after I was issued my whistleblower numbers for the evidence I gave, I was still frustrated that my ex-husband and multiple people who were hurting my children and me were not being arrested and that I wasn't being protected from them. So I tried to file a federal civil rights suit and a federal civil RICO suit. I didn't know you could do a civil RICO suit, but I knew that they were engaged in racketeering type activity. So I just was trying to get an injunction. I didn't think as a pro se litigant, I could win a case against a bunch of judges in a federal district court, but I thought I could get in front of a sympathetic, federally appointed district court judge, maybe one not involved in Chicago Democratic Party politics, and that this judge would give me an injunction to get me away from my ex-husband and the judges who were harming my boys and me. When I filed this federal lawsuit, my mother served the parties for me, because under the rules of civil procedure, a plaintiff can't provide physical service, and they had refused to waive service, so I couldn't just email them copies. I had to have an adult serve them, and my mom did this. My mom read the lawsuit, and then that was in the summer of 2022, and then 2 years later, she began using the same lawsuit she had served as evidence that I had a sophisticated psychotic delusion. So it's confusing. She never said at the time, ooh, this is a delusion I'm holding, go to the hospital, because she's never actually had a real concern about my well-being. It's more of a story that she's cultivated. But I knew that she was telling people that I was having delusions and paranoia, because after I did provide this testimony, I have had encounters with members of law enforcement. I would only sincerely fear that I was having a psychotic episode or delusion if, for example, I saw people who weren't there, or I was like thinking, oh, the telephone pole psychically told me that this person is a federal agent stalking me, and I know that's true. Instead, it's more, I notice those cars are following me. I think it's because they're U.S. Marshals, but I don't know that because I don't get updates from telephone poles. It's just my inference based on facts. And I understand when I'm making inferences. I understand when my inferences, when stated aloud, as in just now, sound weird and crazy to you, but I also understand the difference between reality. I know if a truck is there, I know if a truck is not there. But this is important because my mother told Lori Shearer, the public defender, that I was psychotic, that I am paranoid and see and hear things that aren't there. And at the same time, Lori Shearer had a heavy caseload and didn't take time to review the evidence in my case. This was according to her own statement. She said, I haven't reviewed the body cam footage from witnesses, and I haven't watched the evidence, which included a security camera of most of the incident. Basically, a man had tailgated me. I pulled off to the side of the road. I yelled at him a little bit and I drove away. But because for part of that, I was holding an axe, because I had literally a YouTube channel showing me wood chopping. Because I had an axe in my hand that I was moving to the back of the car, it was called assault with a deadly weapon. But here's the kicker. The guy who tailgated me, and when I pulled over to the side of the road on a country highway to let him pass, instead of passing, he pulled behind me. And I exchanged some words with him very briefly. He did not press charges, and he was never named as a victim in the suit. He was the only person I interacted with, and the only person pulled on the side of the road with me. But there was a car in the eastbound lane. We were on the shoulder, a car in the eastbound lane, which was the nearest. And apparently there was a driver in that car who saw me in proximity to my axe and I guess felt fear. So that was called assault with a deadly weapon. Of the driver I never saw in a truck up above me across a lane of a highway. Apparently this woman was assaulted with a deadly weapon. And this was another thing when, this is the funny part, Lori Shearer never watched this witness's body cam footage. So she would have seen that the witness said that I was yelling at a man on the shoulder. The police report said there was no man on the shoulder. So Lori Shearer said that I had a psychotic delusion and imagined the man on the side of the road. She wrote in some sort of report that she gave to the forensic center evaluator that I imagined that a man followed me onto the side of the road and I yelled at an imaginary man. Here's the funny part. There was a man on the side of the road. He was on the footage from the school. He was mentioned by Sandra Jordan, who was the witness who was interviewed on body cam footage. But Lori Shearer didn't watch that. The man who followed me was not mentioned in the police report. And so the evaluator was like, yeah, this bitch is seeing people who don't exist. Even her own lawyer said that. And so I was committed to a psychiatric hospital. I had to wait in jail 100 days before I was transferred to Cairo Psychiatric Hospital in Cairo, Michigan. And the diagnosis was unspecified psychosis, which was seeing men on the side of the road who don't exist. Funny part is they did exist. And then the second one was imagining myself to be a witness in a federal criminal case in Chicago courts, which is true. But they thought it was not true, so they called it a delusion. So during my entire 100 days in Montgomery County Jail, and then later when I was in the mental hospital, there was never a single disciplinary incident written about me. I was never taken to see a doctor or a nurse. I never exhibited any symptoms of self-harm or harm to others. I never exhibited any disordered thinking. Montgomery County Jail has a special needs pod. I was not assigned to this pod. I was in the general population because there was no issue with me meeting my needs, communicating coherently, and understanding every aspect of every minute of every day. I was with people, none of whom were declared incompetent to stand trial, who thought that Hitler was a Jew and that was why Jews are bad. That was what she said. Sorry, Nikki. And then another one who believed that the whole country is run by 7 families, and she told me how it works, and it involved somehow Japan and the water supply. She was allowed to go to trial. I met women who were on enough psychiatric medication to tranquilize a small donkey. They were allowed to go to trial. They didn't have to go to a mental hospital. It was really weird because I absolutely understood the Michigan Penal Code. I absolutely understood I was being accused of assault with a deadly weapon. And I had drafted a coherent statement of what happened on February 12th because I was arrested on February 10th. And at the time of my arrest, I said to the police officer, while I'm being accused of a crime, I'm not going to talk to you. But then I saw they were charging me with a felony, and I was like, you know what? The worst thing I did was disturbing the peace because I yelled in a street. So I'm going to give a full statement, and they'll give me some sort of misdemeanor, disturbing the peace. I'll get out of here, maybe do 2 weeks in jail. And that's what I wanted to do. So I wrote my statement. The prosecution wouldn't talk to me. I got Lori Shearer as an attorney. I read her my statement. I gave her my statement. I'm publishing this same statement on my Substack. It hasn't changed because it was true. And I said that I was happy to give that directly to the prosecution. I wanted to plead to a lesser charge. But she said the prosecution, I don't know if this is true, it sounds like a lie, but Lori Shearer told me she talked to the prosecution and they wouldn't consider a plea. The problem with arguing to me that this was a serious crime is there was no victim. There was a soccer mom who drove by a woman and a man talking on the side of the road. Her property wasn't damaged. She wasn't seen or touched or interacted with. There wasn't a victim. There wasn't a crime. So there shouldn't have been a felony charge. And if I had had access to effective counsel, I think that the overcharging would have been taken care of. But that was not what Lori Shearer did. By not even reviewing the evidence to see that I was telling the truth and not having a psychotic delusion, she had already violated her duty to me so profoundly that it could never be fixed after what Lori did. So I had no incidents of behavioral outbursts. I was much better educated, much more knowledgeable of the criminal justice system than almost all the women I met in jail. And I survived the 100 days there. I was not fed enough. I was about 119 pounds. I was very thin because I have celiac disease, which means I can't eat gluten. So they would take like gluten-containing items like cake and choke bread, which have a lot of eggs and calories and things. They would take them off the tray, but they wouldn't replace them with the calories. So I just had a calorie deficit every day, and I tried to use whatever money. My mother was the only person who knew I was in jail. I kept trying to get messages to the outside world. Like one girl left jail who was on Instagram. Most people in jail don't do Instagram. They are hardcore Facebook people in rural meth-using jail-going communities. But occasionally one would be on Instagram. I'd say, would you go to my Megsy Beth Instagram and let people know where I am? And I don't think anyone ever did because I know that there were people posted because I was missing, because I was. And my mother is blocked from my social media, but she has people who troll it. And I don't know why I asked her to have the people who troll it post to let people know where I was, but she wanted me to be isolated. And then I tried writing. I attended 2 churches in Chicago. I wrote to both of them, asking them to pass my letter to parishioners or congregation members. And I don't know if they did. I never heard from anyone. So I was totally isolated. But sometimes my mother would put some money in my account, so I would buy as many calories as I could, usually like a Snickers bar, packets of peanut butter, to try to get extra calories every day, but it still wasn't enough. I lost a lot of weight. And then I was finally transferred to Cairo Psychiatric Hospital, which is the highest security mental hospital. People think they understand what it's like, but they have no idea. You're mixed in with, people think there are different levels, like the really scary people are in one, and the chill eating disorders and mildly depressed people are in another. No, it's the most severe people in every unit, really dangerous people. I was assaulted 3 times. 2 times male patients assaulted me sexually in the courtyard, grabbing my breasts. And then a 3rd time, a female patient came into my room while I was sleeping. And at that time, I'd torn my Achilles tendon playing kickball in gym, but I made it on base. And so I was in a wheelchair because I had to have my leg completely immobilized. And I was in bed, and this woman came in while I was sleeping and climbed on top of me and started beating my head. And there was no orderly on the hall. She was off talking somewhere. So she probably hit me 10 times. I screamed like 5 times. I got a concussion, contusions all over the left side of my face because I was trying to protect myself like this, but she got punches in. And yeah, that's assault. So like that, I thought that was ironic because that was assault. And I was there because I was accused of assault, but I've never punched anyone. And my face was punched in so that's what was funny too. I was like, because it's the state of Michigan versus Megan Mason for assaulting someone, and nobody was assaulted. But then the state of Michigan quite literally assaulted me. That was kind of funny too. The same sort of funny as Lori Scherer not looking at the evidence and noticing that I wasn't having a psychotic delusion. Like, haha. So yeah, I was beaten up, and it was better than jail in a lot of ways. I had more physical freedom, but I was constantly, people were constantly speaking to me as if I was profoundly mentally ill, which most of the people there were. There were a lot of people with severe psychosis, especially men, any man over 30 who had like schizophrenia or schizoaffectoid disorder. They usually didn't know what day it was. They were unclear about the president. They were constantly seeing and talking to things and people that weren't there. That was my experience of people with profound psychosis. I met other people who, yeah, I guess everyone I met heard voices or saw things. And then a lot of them were self-harmers, but it was usually to just kind of get attention. There would be a lot of patients who had like 2 people who had to be assigned to them 24 hours a day. So they always had, and I think a lot of them liked the extra attention. But that's also because unlike jail, in a mental hospital, they don't ever confine your movements if they can help it. So like the woman who beat me up, you would think, oh, they'll just put her in a cell where she's locked in at night, but they won't do that. They can't confine her freedom. I know, it sounds weird. So what they do is they literally have 1 or 2, like during the day, because she's strong, they'd have 2 men on her. But like at night, she'd have to get like a good running start. They'd give her 1. And they had helmets because she likes to punch heads. She's very into punching heads. And so they would just sit outside her room 24 hours a day to make sure she didn't come and beat me up. but this was the really fun part of a mental hospital. I was raw dogging the whole thing because I didn't have a mental illness before going into the hospital. I wasn't diagnosed with a mental illness in the hospital, but I knew that any, like let's say I say, oh, I've been having trouble sleeping, just stress. This is something anyone might say to their doctor or coworker anywhere in the world. When you're in a mental hospital, that can get shifted into your notes. Patient has chronic insomnia, has had it all her life, clearly manic. And it sounds like I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. So my point is, most people who spent 200 days locked in a room would want to be drugged up, but I couldn't ask for the drugs because that would open the door to a false diagnosis, which I wasn't prepared to do. So at night, all the other patients were fucking knocked out and I was raw dogging it. So that meant I had normal wake sleep cycles. So if 20 people are sitting outside your room, like joking and talking, it's going to wake you up. But they're staff at a mental hospital and they want you to shut the fuck up. So I'm pretty sure the reason that Caro finally released me, because they never diagnosed me or treated me for anything, but I was such a bitch about the staff in the hallway keeping me up at night. I think that's why they let me go. And I'm glad it worked. But it was better than jail because you had freedom of movement, but people were constantly just talking to you as if you're so inferior to them. It was much more pronounced than, because when you're in jail, a lot of the corrections officers will just straight up ignore you, or some of them will be rude, but there's never a sense that they think that you're like an animal. Well, I'm sure some of them do, but the ones I dealt with, it wasn't that extreme. I always felt like they just thought I was a human being who had a lot worse luck and had done stupider shit than them. But they still talked to me like I existed. But in the mental hospital, it would be like you'd put on a pair of socks and someone would be questioning whether you were wearing the right socks, or like telling you like, you should wear socks every day. And there's like no way to respond other than, thank you for the feedback. I will work on socks every day. Because if you say, I don't need you to tell me how to dress, then they're like, patient is still refusing treatment. Patient is very, very reactive to basic feedback and input. Patient clearly doesn't want to participate in her healing. Patient is very defiant. So you just have to I can understand why they used to give people lobotomies, because I kept thinking, God, if they just drill a hole in my head, this place would be so much easier to take. But at first, I thought that there was no way out because, let's say you're bipolar and you have a severe episode, you're like, okay, I know they want me to be sleeping and they want me to, I don't know, not be spending $20,000 on my credit card, whatever your symptoms are. But I didn't have symptoms. I just had a judge and saying that, well, this bitch's lawyer says she's crazy, so she's crazy. And then the forensic center saying, well, this bitch's lawyer says she's crazy, and the judge says she's crazy, so she's crazy. And then you get to the psychiatrist. The first one, her name was Dr. Sonopati. I think I probably spoke to her maybe a total of 25 minutes the time I was there, including an intake and then a couple follow-ups. And at first I met with her, and her diagnosis was that I didn't have a clear mental illness, but I had clearly had a psychotic episode because I saw a man who didn't exist on the shoulder of the road, and because I imagined I was a witness in a federal criminal case. We had a team meeting with the social worker, 5 people, and Dr. Sonopati said, well, the judge ordered you here, so I need to come up with a diagnosis to get you out of here. So we're going to say temporary psychosis, and I'm going to recommend you take some Risperdal. And I said, I don't know of any psychiatric symptoms I'm presenting. I don't want to take a psychiatric medication unless I have a symptom to treat. And I had a social worker named Tanya Hanselman, and I said, you know, Tanya, maybe you could help me understand. I don't want to take medication. I don't have a need for it. So can you just tell me 5 symptoms that I'm presenting and 5 areas of improvement we would expect to see after I start taking a drug? And Tanya didn't answer because Dr. Senapati interrupted and said, you don't need to be having symptoms now. We can base our diagnosis by going back in your history. It's like, yeah, but for me to be treated, I need to have a symptom to treat. That really is how it's supposed to work. So I refused, and she said, well, do you understand that we could tie you down and forcibly inject you? And I said, I understand that. And I said, I won't resist violently. I'll non-violently resist. That's as much in my own interest. I don't want a broken needle in my arm. But I didn't see that. And then I just spent weeks thinking that they were going to tie me down and inject me. I think that it's, along with the freedom of movement, I would have had to have had a symptom. And again, I wasn't presenting symptoms, so they didn't have a reason to tie me down and forcibly inject me. At least that's what I assumed. But every day I was terrified. I really thought that I was going to be strapped to a chair and forcibly given shots on a daily basis. It was scary. And then Dr. Senapati, she was just very brittle and defensive. She never would explain to me how my life would be improved by this. She never even pretended it was healthcare. It was just like, a judge ordered you here. I need to give the judge a diagnosis, and then you leave. And since there wasn't a diagnosis, there wasn't treatment. So I didn't know how I was going to get out of there. I just strapped in for the long haul. And I had to go to like weekly classes that were like, I mean, it would be like an hour of a social worker sitting there saying, what's the difference between a sentence and a verdict? And it would be like, the jury delivers the verdict, and then the judge decides what the sentence. A verdict is if you're guilty or innocent. And then a sentence is what happens if you're found guilty. But I'm saying every day for an hour, that same concept. Every day for an hour. Because there were a lot of people there who were profoundly incompetent. But if you actually aren't incompetent, it's not fun to go and sit and have people talk to you like this for an hour every day. But then there were others. I got to go to art and color, and I did gym until I tore my Achilles tendon. And there was courtyard, unlike jail where you never got to go outside. And then Dr. Senapati, like once a week, would ask me if I was okay, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm fine. And then one time she came up to me and she's like, well, you didn't give me permission to talk to your attorney. I was like, well, my attorney's only spoken to me once or twice, and I don't value her. I'm forced to have her as my attorney because the state of Michigan says I'm incompetent to stand trial, so that means I can't fire her. So I don't want you talking to her. And Dr. Senapati said, well, we need to come up with some diagnosis for you. Maybe it's a personality disorder, like maybe she could find proof that I was lying or something. I said, not my problem. And then Dr. Senapati was replaced. And every 45 days, I was assessed by a man named Dr. Emil. And so I went for my first assessment with Dr. Emil at 45 days. I was the same as I am now, the same as I am on February 10th. I could count down from 100 by 7s or 8s or whatever he chose that day. 100, 93, 86, I don't know. Anyway, usually you don't have to be tested to find out if you're a competent adult. So I'm trying to explain to you what it's like, because it's very destabilizing. And I presented as I am now, but Dr. Emil found that I could not be released. And Tanya Hanselman, my social worker, came and, yeah, Dr. Emil wanted me to explain to you that the reason he couldn't find you competent is because you still have a delusion that you saw a man on the side of the road, which is not the facts. And I said, well, actually, facts in the American justice system are determined through trial. That's why it's called a trial of facts. It is a fact that the police report doesn't mention this man on the side of the road. But I saw the man on the side of the road, so he existed. So it's not a psychotic delusion. But that psychotic delusion, remember the joke at the beginning? Turns out the man was there on the video camera and the other witness saw him and I saw him and he existed. But that wasn't in the police report and my lawyer didn't say that when she had me committed. So, but I did have one person there in my corner. Well, other staff were like in my corner, like the PE staff were great because we just played volleyball and kickball until I was taken out. And Dr. Robert Fells was my psychologist for a while until he was transferred off my case. And he always believed me. And after Dr. Emil said, I don't know what to do, Dr. Fells, because I did see this man. So for me to get out of here, should I read the police report and memorize it? So I say what matches that? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And he said, well, no, you remember, and I have no reason to think that you're making it up or saying things that aren't there. So you just know what you know. And his support meant everything. It really helped get me through. I do think that my plan was to just, like from my first day at intake, they said, what are your treatment goals? And I knew I was going to give you treatment goals because that implies I ever at any point agreed that this was a legal, appropriate, medically necessary commitment. And it wasn't. So I always said my goals are to do the least amount of physical and emotional and mental harm possible while forced to stay at Cara Hospital. And other than the concussions and the assaults and having my reputation ruined, isolation, not trusting anybody, I think I've mitigated the harms somewhat. So yeah, eventually, for whatever reason, Dr. Emil decided to let me go. And Dr. Sinopati had been replaced by another psychiatrist. I think Dr. Garlapati was her name. And I think she eventually realized that since I wasn't demonstrating symptoms, it didn't make sense for the taxpayers to be keeping me in an expensive mental hospital for 24-hour daycare. So I was released. And then at this point, as I've mentioned in another video, the state agreed to reduce my charge to misdemeanor assault, which I didn't want to plead guilty to because I didn't touch anyone or threaten anyone. So I don't believe I could be said to have assaulted anyone. But I'd already served 200 days and the maximum sentence was 90 days. And so the attorney I hired to replace Lori Shearer, who was competent and did provide me effective counsel, she recommended that I definitely take that plea. Otherwise, I would have had to sit for another 6 months in jail to wait for a felony jury to hear my case. I had thought the judge would simply dismiss it because there was no evidence I assaulted anyone, and according to the plain letter of the law, you shouldn't bind a case to felony court if the state doesn't have evidence of a crime. The state did not have evidence of a crime, but my competent attorney told me that in his 3 years on the bench, Judge Egglestrom has never dismissed a felony charge. And so I didn't think he was about to start with me. So I was allowed to plead no contest and I got out of jail. And I'm just trying to, I don't think I can rebuild the reputation that I had, but just for my own good, I want to keep making these videos and write on Substack, which I've started to do, just so that I can stay in touch with who I really am, because I feel like it's been lost in this horrible chain of legal events over the last decade. So thank you for supporting me on this channel. Thank you for supporting me when I didn't know people were out here helping me and looking for me. That means a lot to me. As I said, I'm working through my story here and also on Substack, so I hope you'll link below and come over and read. A year and a half ago, I was living in a tent in the North Carolina mountains with my dog, and I wrote a memoir. I really hoped that this case was going to end last summer or the summer before last. Of course it didn't. And so I'm sharing that, and also the new adventures which seem to be happening whether I like it or not. So please subscribe to this channel and click over to my Substack.